I often talk on this podcast about the importance of nutrition, the right type of nutrition that nourishes your body, and exercise, doing the right type of exercise, in particular, strength training and walking with the correct amount of HIIT cardio. And I talk about these things in conjunction with aging, perimenopause, menopause, hormones. That's been my focus. What I don't talk about too often is the psychology of aging. Now, before I dive into this topic, I am definitely not a psychologist, do not have that type of training. These are my personal observations with myself, working with clients, and even friends that are within my age group. Hi, my name is Carol Covino. I'm an online fitness coach for women over the age of 40 who are experiencing perimenopausal and menopausal hormonal symptoms. I help these ladies to lose the body fat for good and to tone and to strengthen their bodies. What I want to focus on in today's episode, and by the way, this is my 100th podcast episode. And I chose the topic that I chose for today because I felt it was suiting for a 100th episode. I felt that it just fit because I do talk a lot about nutritional science. I talk a lot about exercise science, physiology, hormones, but I rarely discuss the psychology, the mindset that accompanies aging and how it changes from decade to decade. And once again, these are my personal observations. When I was in my 40s, I was not that focused on the next decade. I wasn't thinking about my 50s at all, and certainly not my 60s or 70s. I was in the throes of raising children, our three children, with my husband. I was working for many of those years. I was a school teacher for part of the time, and then also a group fitness and yoga instructor later on. My kids at one point were in three different schools, three different types of activities. So I was always driving around the city, putting miles on on the car, on the SUV, trying to keep up with their lifestyle. It was the decade that my parents passed away within 6 months of each other. My mom passed away first, and then my dad passed away 6 months later. I was my father's caretaker, so that was a traumatic experience, even though we knew it was coming and I felt I had prepared myself. When you go through something like that, you were really never prepared to lose a parent. It doesn't matter whether they're 50, 60, 70, 80, or 90. You're just never prepared for that emotional loss. So I wasn't thinking too much about age. I don't even know that I had much of an opinion on it. I was too busy to think about age. Part of that I feel was numbing out a little bit, doing so much exercise and being so busy on the daily that there wasn't much time to think about the future. I was very much in the moment. And when I started to really experience menopausal symptoms toward my late 40s that became distressing. So they were hot flashes, lack of sleep, mood changes, brain fog. Again, I chose to numb out and not really address those things, pretend like they weren't happening. I remember being embarrassed when the personal trainer that I was working with mentioned my being near the age of going through menopause. I don't know why, but I felt shame. I was ashamed of the fact that I was going through this transition. And I think it's because of the way society was painting it at the time and really still does, that it was a negative thing, like you were going off of a cliff. When I was in my 50s, I acknowledged this change, got the help I needed with my nurse practitioner, got the support with HRT, hormone replacement therapy, biological hormone replacement therapy. and began to change nutrition and exercise. My transformation occurred when I was 50. I began to compete and do things that I never thought were possible. If you're new to my podcast, I've competed for years in bodybuilding shows, first in the division of figure and then in bikini. I'm not a stage person. I'm not an outgoing person. I'm very reserved. This was well outside my comfort zone, but it made me feel good to know I was doing something outside my comfort zone. And the first half of my 50s was focused more on aesthetics, looking great in a bikini, doing these shows, defying age. I was defying age. Then in my late 50s, as I began to struggle with my autoimmune diagnosis and also a diagnosis of post traumatic stress disorder, which I went into treatment for, things shifted a little bit for me. I still wanted to look great in a pair of jeans or a mini skirt or bikini, and I was still competing. But my perspective about aging was starting to change. And what I noticed in particular was I was getting anxiety. I was anxious about it. For all my talk about age is just a number and be your best at every age and age with strength and embrace every moment. Be the woman that you've always wanted to be. Do the things you've always wanted to do. Find your purpose and your passion. For all of that talk, I was afraid of the aging process, afraid of what was lying ahead. And so, in typical Carol fashion, pushed it to the back of my mind and numbed out a little bit, not wanting to think about turning 60. Then there came the day where that tactic just didn't work anymore. And it started at about age 59 with 60 creeping up on me. And definitely by the time I turned 60, I spent the first year of my 60s, I just turned 61, processing what was changing in my life. Hey, now I was an empty nester, just my husband and myself for the first time in decades. I had a son off in the Navy. That was a very hard adjustment for me when he enlisted and went into the Navy and is now stationed in Japan and off on deployment as I record this. His 22nd birthday is actually tomorrow, as a matter of fact. And I felt a sense of loss once again, different from the loss I felt from my late 40s going into my 50s. The loss I felt there was more about hormones being gone and feeling less of a woman, even though that wasn't true. That was what I was struggling with at the time. And getting past that and realizing life doesn't end at 50, life doesn't end with menopause, it's just starting. But in my 60s, it was a little bit different. The hormones have been dealt with. The exercise routine that I do is established. I've put on the muscle I wanted to put on. My nutrition is dialed in. My sleep is really doing great at this point, 7 to 9 hours a night, and I get a good sleep score from my Aura Ring. And I was starting to learn stress management from being in therapy and then just also my own research on the importance of managing stress. So everything seemed to be in place to age gracefully, as they call it. But those fears, that anxiety was rearing its head. Even sometimes I would lay down in bed, be really tired, and suddenly have an anxiety attack for no reason and start thinking about what is it going to be like in 10 years, 15 years? Things are going too fast. Life is passing too fast. My kids are they're grown. What's happened? And I would go down that rabbit hole and have a full-blown panic attack laying in bed on a Sunday night. Then I began to look differently at what I needed to focus on going forward in my 60s. And so the purpose of this episode is I want to share with you what I'm focusing on now as I go through this next decade. And granted, it's probably going to change, and I'm probably going to be doing a podcast on an entirely different subject in a few years. But this is where I'm at right now. It's dealing with that unknown and with that anxiety. So I'll tell a little bit of a story here. I was speaking with a woman quite recently in her early 70s, and she shared with me that she often has anxiety and panic attacks in the evening or even throughout the day that are centered on mortality, on her own mortality. She lost several siblings to strokes and heart attacks. Obviously, some genetics going on there along with lifestyle. And she shared with me that she has fears that she's next, that there's these little voices in her head telling her, well, how much time do you really have? All your siblings, practically all your siblings are gone. This is going to happen to you too. And that she has to get it under control. She has to get her thoughts under control. And I understood it. Even though I'm 61, I'm over a decade behind her. I understood where she was coming from and where those fears were coming from and where the voices were coming from. The little nagging voice inside of your head. That is fear. That is anxiety. That is telling you to be afraid of what lays ahead. And so I began to make some changes in my lifestyle to address this. And this time, not numb out through the change, really go head on into it. And yes, there'll be some fears and anxiety, but learning to overcome that. So I'm going to share some of the changes that I've recently made. I've recommitted to my faith. I've always believed in God. I've always had a strong faith. I was raised in a Christian home. That's my background. And for a good part of my life, I have been able to hold fast to that. But I've had moments that I stray, like we all do. And it doesn't mean I stop believing or lose my faith, but I move away from spending time in my faith and really meditating on it, praying on it, being close to God. And if you feel or believe differently, that's fine. I'm the type of person that believes people have to find their way, their relationship with God, their way of dealing with life. So I never force things down on people. But I felt the strong need to reconnect spiritually. When I went through the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, I moved away from my faith for a period of time. And I would go to church, but I would not be present. My mind would be wandering. I'd be wondering how much longer I had before I could get up and we all go to brunch. I would try to listen, I would try to take notes, but invariably something would take my attention away. And I was aware this was happening and I wasn't liking it. Same thing was happening when I would try to pray. Something would come in, distract me, and I couldn't do it. And I realized some of that was dealing with the past, what had happened in my past. And I was trying to process that to the point that there just wasn't room for anything else. So the first thing that I've done in this first year of my 60s, at 61, from 60 to 61, was to recommit to my faith and really be present when I'm in church, when I'm listening to the music, when I'm praying. Really be present. Then I recently made a decision to go back to a Bible study that I went to, oh my goodness, over 15 years ago when my kids were young. That was very beneficial. It was beneficial because it was very structured. I do well with structure. And there was, I believe, an intellectual component to it. So I was really learning how to apply what I was reading and studying to my own life. So I made a commitment to go back into that study, started last night, met my group leader. She's wonderful. The group is wonderful. It's more of that intention to be present and in the moment and to really be living out my faith, not just saying I believe this or that, but living it out. And this is helping me through some of the unknown of aging and some of that anxiety. It's helping me to be present, to spend that time meditating, praying, is allowing me an opportunity to process things in a way that I've never done in my entire life. The next change I made is with my wine. And you may be thinking, wine? What? Did you take up drinking wine? Are you drinking a new wine? What's going on? So I've always enjoyed wines and not for the buzz, really. I've enjoyed the taste, pairing them with food. My husband and I used to go to Napa Valley, take the tours, and now I'm into dry farm wines, which is all natural wines that are curated and sent to your home, lower alcohol, no sugar, low sugar. And I still enjoy them. But what I realized was I was doing things like, okay, preparing dinner or working around the house in the evening, getting the dishes cleaned and having that glass here and that glass there, and then a glass with dinner and maybe a glass to relax afterward, getting to be a habit. And I was lying in bed one night and had one of my famous anxiety attacks, and that popped up. And what popped up is, Carol, you're numbing out. And it wasn't like I was passing out or drunk or anything like that. It wasn't that. But it was becoming a habit, an unwinding, let's relax, some of it's social kind of habit. And I thought, you know what? You're all about health. You're all about aging well. This is definitely affecting your sleep. And we know from the research that sleep is an important part of our immune system, of our health, and potentially longevity by these studies. So I thought this can't be good to have a glass of wine before bed. Yeah, you fall asleep fast, but you're restless, your REM sleep is affected, and your deep sleep is affected. And REM and deep sleep are exceptionally important for our health and for our brain health. Well, when I bought the Aura Ring gives you information within an app on your phone or whatever device you choose about your sleep habits. And it shows you your heart rate variance, your recovery, your restfulness, your temperature, changes in your temperature throughout the night, whether it goes up or down. It keeps track of your exercise in relation to your sleep. It keeps track of your deep sleep, REM sleep, light sleep, things like that. And I could see it was affecting my sleep score and it was affecting my readiness score. So I made a decision in that moment of anxiety. I am cutting back. I'm not saying I won't ever have a glass of wine or do a wine tour, anything like that, but this needs to stop being a habit for relaxation, for numbing out. If there's something that I need to deal with, I need to deal with it and I need to be fully present. I need to feel my best in the morning. I don't need to be waking up groggy. I need to be on top of things where I can process things. And I need my brain health. And the more that I study about the effects of alcohol and not just on sleep, but in general, I realize this is a necessity. I need to address this. So I made that decision to stop using the wind down as a method. And I'm being very transparent with you, no judgment here. Because, like I've said before, I've done all of the things wrong. I've eaten the wrong things. I've exercised the wrong way. I've not been as conscientious as I should be with when I have a glass of wine or how often or how much. I haven't always focused on my sleep and I've let stress and past trauma take over. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. I've said this many times that I do believe I had a window of time in perimenopause that I could have potentially prevented getting this disease. But through stress, past trauma, lack of sleep, not dealing with my hormones, the wrong type of foods, I went down that pathway. I want to share a few more things with you that you might find helpful. And some of it is from the work of Dr. Amen, Amen. And you can find him on Instagram, I believe, but he is in the mental health field. He's a big name in the space, someone whom I like to follow. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about nutrition as it relates to happiness, our ability to handle things, our anxiety, and our stress. And before I go into that, this is where I'm going with it. As we age and we go through these decades, we're going to have some anxiety. In our 40s, it's more anxiety about losing our figure, getting belly fat, having our hormones gone, losing reproductive years, empty nest. Then, as we move towards 60, we start to realize, oh, this aging thing is kind of real. Nobody gets out of this alive. This is real. It's happening to me. Yes, I'm healthy. Yes, I look great, but it's happening to me too. And then in our 70s, I think it's even more of a wake up call. And if we have not done the lifestyle changes that we needed to do at 75, there is just something that happens where people they rapidly age. They kind of go off a cliff. They stop being as active. They lose a lot of muscle. I think some depression can set in. Habits of the past start to really compound and add up. The aging process can accelerate. That's a scary thing to be at the door of. You're right at the door of it. So I think rather than hiding from these things, we do need to be proactive. I recently was a guest on a summit where I was interviewed and we discussed aging and how we should be planning for how we age. I think we make a big mistake when we put our heads in the sand and we pretend it's not going to happen and it's far off. Now, I'm not saying dwell on the years of your passing or the years where we have more wrinkles. I don't want to say decline because we don't necessarily have to decline drastically, but those years where there is some diminished functioning. Nobody wants to focus on that. I don't want to focus on that. It was part of my numbing out. But we do a disservice when we don't look at those things because the day comes, and if we haven't done things within our earlier years and decades to prepare, it can be a rough and rocky road. And I do not want to be an invalid in those years. I've seen that. I do not want to lose my mental capabilities. I've seen that. I want to be able to go where I want to go and do mostly what I want to do within reason. And so I want to prepare for that. And my 60s is about preparing for that physically and then also making sure that my mental health is in a good place. I don't think that's addressed very often. I think people age, both men and women, they get depressed. I've seen it. I saw it in my father-in-law. Unless they have something in place in their lives to help them through. My father was a very spiritual man, and he leaned heavily on that when he was diagnosed with cancer and in the last years of his life. And he largely was not depressed. And I feel because he had that strong spiritual connection, and then he had family, he had the people around him that he loved, and it grounded him. We need to do the same. Entering into the more mature years and not being prepared for what your mind can do, the thoughts that can come in, the fear of the unknown, the fear of aging, the fear of death, these things can get a hold of us. And just like we prepare ourselves physically, we need to prepare ourselves mentally. So I'm going to share a few of these nutrition strategies. So, first of all, you want to choose the foods that are going to put you in a good mood. And not surprisingly, they are going to be the foods that are natural and whole foods. So they're going to include the organic, colorful fruits and vegetables and leafy greens and berries, the sustainably raised fish, wild-caught fish, grass-fed beef, pastured poultry, nuts and seeds, the healthy oils and fats, and avoiding the seed oils such as canola and soybean oil, eggs if you're not sensitive to them. Heck, even clean protein powder can be a source, although I prefer most of it to come from food. And as I said, the organic and unprocessed foods, low glycemic ones that do not spike our blood sugar levels, and high fiber foods that nourish our gut. Because if we have dysbiosis, if we have pylori, if we have yeast, if we have problems in the gut microbiome, it's going to affect our mood. And not surprisingly, stress and our mood affects our gut. And the gut is referred to as the second brain. I don't like the word gut, but I'm using it here. Digestive tract, referred to as the second brain. The microbiome and the balance of it is a big part of mental health. Foods that are going to take away that good feeling are going to be the highly processed ones, the ones sprayed with pesticides, the high glycemic, high sugar impact foods, foods that are low in fiber, foods that aren't even real foods. They're food-like substances, artificially colored and sweetened foods, foods with hormones, antibiotics, and in plastic containers, which are known to be toxic. They are finding through research that there is that connection with anxiety, with stress, with depression, and food. In fact, they're finding that some food sensitivities don't always show up in a manner that we see. So it's not always, say, a rash on our skin. It's not always rosacea. It's not always a breakout of pimples or bloating and indigestion. It's not always those things or stomach pain. It can also be a response of being depressed or anxious that can be connected to a food sensitivity. So having yourself tested for food sensitivities can be helpful, or even doing a temporary elimination diet and gradually reintroducing foods back in. We want to watch the sugar impact because, again, excess blood glucose, it's something that our body needs, but can be toxic in high levels. Toxic to our body, toxic to our brains. They are finding connections with this, and Alzheimer's, calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. Now, The research, we don't have enough research, and I'm just going to do a side note on nutrition. And I've really, excuse me, I really dove in deep into this the past several weeks. And the more I learn, the less I know. There are so many different studies, most of them on mice, and so can't we can't extrapolate completely from that type of study and apply it to human beings. I mean, obviously, we're not mice. Studies done on men are not going to apply well to women. And older studies of nutrition, even 20 years ago, can be a problem because if we used food, and of course we would have used food from that period of time, it's changed. So let's say a study was done 30 years ago. Our food supply and what's in it has changed. So essentially, it's hard to take what was uh, concluded from those studies and apply them to today, 2022, because the food supply is different. So some of the results could have been affected by what was in those foods. So, in other words, processed foods are now ultra processed foods. We had processed foods 20, 30 years ago, but now they're ultra processed. There's even more additives and more manipulation of our food. So we have to take that into account. But one thing that we can take away is that eliminating processed foods, eating natural whole foods is going to benefit your body. Eliminating sugar and corn syrup and seed oils is going to benefit your body. Eating a diet that is lower glycemic or has a lower sugar impact is going to be better for your body. You're going to be more insulin sensitive or working your way toward that if your diet is natural and doesn't have those added sugars in it or corn syrup or seed oil such as the canola and the soybean and the sunflower and so on. So I think it's important to understand that although we might disagree, all of us as coaches, health coaches, and those of us in the nutrition world, we're going to disagree. Some people are saying the answer is keto. Some people are saying the answer is intermittent fasting. Some people are saying eat less, exercise more. There's all these different dogmas. There's the paleo, the plant-based, and people just argue. They argue on social media, they tear each other up. Give you an example, I recently made a post on intermittent fasting. I am a proponent of intermittent fasting for women. However, I do believe it's not right for every woman, and I don't believe it's right for every woman at every time in her life. So, in other words, there might be times in her life where fasting is perfect, and times in her life where maybe she shouldn't be fasting and holding back on that and having a longer feeding window. So I always take that bio individuality into account. Not all of my clients fast. I am currently running the IF45 intermittent fasting program for women. I became certified in this program through Cynthia Thurlow. You can check her out. That's Cynthia Thurlow. Wonderful woman and very research and science backed. And that's why I wanted to go through her program. I didn't want to just jump into teaching intermittent fasting without all of the science research and information. I went through that program and I was doing a promotion or sign up for the program on social media. Posted my little post about how intermittent fasting had changed my life. And what I referred to specifically was coming from the bodybuilding community. I was accustomed to doing 6 small meals per day. Well, what had happened over time, and in particular in the off season when I was eating large amounts of carbohydrates at every meal, was I was getting metabolically inflexible, meaning I needed to eat every 2 hours or I was nauseous, sweating, shaky, and had a headache. I was at one point eating a bowl of white rice per my coach at every single meal and a full bowl of oatmeal in the morning. When I first tried to space out my meals, when I was learning about intermittent fasting, I thought, okay, I'll start with just spacing out my meals, 3 hours. I couldn't do it. I was getting sick. I was getting nauseous. I was getting shaky. Over time, I finally got a little bit better. I cut back on the carbohydrates, began eating carbohydrates that were more plant-based rather than the rice. Got a little bit easier. I could go 3 hours, even 4. Then I decided to try a 12-hour fast. I remember we went to church. I've told this story before. I couldn't even sit through the service. I was doubled up, feeling like I was going to actually throw up in the middle of the service, had to walk out once again, shaky. It was an emergency. Get me to brunch. I need to eat now. Then I realized this is not good. I should not be feeling this way. So I gradually worked on increasing my fasting windows. So I had to cut it back to 10 hours for the fasting. Then it was 11, then 12, and I hung out at 12 for a very long time before I worked my way up to the 16 hours. Now, I do not do 16 hours every day. I'm very lean, body fat relatively low. I do 16 hours 2 to 3 times per week. On the other days, I do 12 to 14. And I go by how I feel. If I'm not feeling well, energy is low, I don't do a 16-hour fast that day. So I'm very much in touch with that. So I was telling my story on Facebook about the rice, about carrying rice around and cold tilapia and eating, sitting down at the gym and eating this meal and feeling like I couldn't get 2 hours without eating. And spoke about how intermittent fasting had really helped to stabilize my blood glucose levels. And now I wore a continuous glucose monitor, so I can speak into this. I saw in real time the effect of eating frequently and the effect of spacing out my meals and fasting. I saw it on my CGM monitor up on my phone with an app. And I actually tested it and found that when I was eating often, my blood glucose was spiking drastically and staying up. And I mean drastically in the danger zone. When I began to space my meals and intermittent fast, it leveled out so much better. And I felt better. I felt physically better and in control of my body. And my life wasn't run by food. But going back to the Facebook post, I had some people message me directly and a few pop on and make comments that were so defensive. They were making comments about, I have to have carbs. I need carbs to put on muscle. I hadn't even talked about carbs in the post, had never even mentioned carbs, never once said I was low carb. And most days I'm not, I'm moderate carb. They were basically almost, I don't want to say offended, but defensive is probably the word because it was challenging their dogma. Now, I'm not saying what they're doing is wrong. They're bodybuilders, they're doing the bodybuilding diet, and I'm still a bodybuilder. But I'm not doing the every 2 hours of eating because I know it does not stabilize blood sugar. And they have shown in research that that is not true. Frequent eating does not stabilize blood sugar. Now, there are some people that might need to eat more frequently because of certain conditions or because their body fat's low. I get it, that's fine. But in general, for most people, this is not the case. But it was interesting how they responded. it was things like, well, I don't intermittent fast and I have lots of muscle and I think people should just eat when they're hungry and not eat when they're not hungry. Well, problem with that is many people are getting signals from hormones because of eating so frequently like I was getting those signals saying eat, 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 eat. And we can also get wrong signals from processed food. If you're eating this processed food, it's highly addictive, it's very palatable, it goes down easy, it has all these yummy flavors. It's addictive to our mind, to our brain, to our body. I responded back and let them know, hey, first of all, I never said I was low carb. I simply said that I don't want to eat 6 bowls of rice anymore. 6 bowls of rice is pretty extreme. And I never said, one gentleman said, well, intermittent fasting isn't right for everyone. And then another woman hopped on and said the same thing. And I said, I also never said that in my post. I never once said intermittent fasting is right for everyone. I gave my own personal story. So it's just interesting how people are so wrapped up in their dogmas that they can't look at the whole picture. I'm not plant-based. I don't promote plant-based. I feel it's very hard to get the protein. But I was recently a guest on a plant-based platform, a Facebook platform, a group to speak about hormones. And I was respectful of their beliefs and they were respectful of mine. I think what we have to look at is what actually works. We know that time restricted eating can have a benefit and it has shown benefits in research. We know that swapping out high sugar impact foods for lower sugar impact foods can be beneficial for insulin sensitivity and preventing insulin resistance. We know it can be helpful with weight loss. We know that getting away from an ultra processed diet is just going to be better for us overall because eating these additives or something sprayed with weed killer isn't going to be very good for our bodies. It's toxic. So, from there, whether you're plant based, paleo, keto, carb cycling, moderate carb, low carb, high carb, I think we can all agree that choosing certain foods are beneficial for our overall health, potentially our longevity, and potentially our health span, our quality of life, and our mental health. So, starting to incorporate those brain healthy foods, even herbs and spices that are brain healthy, such as basil, black pepper, cayenne pepper, cinnamon, cloves, garlic, ginger, mint, nutmeg. Those are just a few. Turmeric, thyme, sage, saffron, which Dr. Amen has found to be very beneficial for depression, which I find interesting. I'm actually thinking of ordering his saffron and giving it a try and letting you know what I think. Even dark chocolate can have some benefits on our mood. Some mushrooms have some benefits. And as I mentioned, even a clean protein powder, getting in enough protein can make a difference. So once again, what I want you to take away from this, wherever you are, you might be 38, you might be 48, 58, 68. I don't know where you're at. I don't know your personal circumstances. I actually would love to know. So message me on Instagram. I do respond to the messages. My Instagram is at Carol Covino Fitness. Let me know where you're at. And if you're dealing with any of that anxiety and depression about aging and what lays ahead, and maybe losing some things like, hey, maybe you've had some knee replacement, some back surgery, shoulder surgery. These things happen as we age. Depression can set in, anxiety can set in. Understand that's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. The idea of aging and death it's scary. It's an unknown. But what can we do in the here and the now so that when we get to these junctures, so that when we get to these decades, we can embrace who we are? My mission going forward isn't just going to be about hormones. And it isn't just going to be about nutrition and fat loss and exercise and lifting. Those things continue. I'm going to continue to talk about them, but I want to expand into the mental health aspect because I think that's ignored and how we can improve our mental health, whether it's through our diet, our exercise. We know that exercise is a huge buster and it's a stress buster as long as we're doing it in the correct way. It can so much help our stress levels and mood. But I also want to look at the mindset, the attitude that we have about aging, swapping that negativity out for what can I do? What can I do for my family, my community, the generation behind me to help them through this process, to be the mentor, to be the guide. I think when we become the mentor and the guide, it stops being about us and having a pity party because we're getting older and, and approaching 70 or whatever, or 65, as I'm doing. I'm 61. I think that then it becomes the bigger picture. What can I what can I produce as a legacy that lives on? What do I want to be remembered for? What can I contribute to my current society? And that's where I'm at right now because I think by taking those action steps, not numbing out through the wine at night, focusing on some type of spiritual relationship, spiritual life, meditation, prayer, really taking the time that we have and making it count is so, so important. So, a little bit of a different episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. My 100th episode. Once again, I would love to hear from you. I do have a free resource I'm offering right now. The link is in the show notes. It is my guide to essential oils, in particular for relieving hormonal symptoms and increasing energy. So, do grab that guide. And I also have partnered with Beauty Counter. They are a company that promotes clean, healthy beauty products that are non-toxic. You can find the link to that in my bio. I encourage you to check out their products as well, and you can receive a discount on your first order. Thank you for joining me for my 100th episode. Wherever you are in the world, I wish you every blessing.